The first light of dawn slowly stretched over Izayama village, painting the mud houses and palm-thatched roofs in warm gold. The morning breeze carried the soft smell of wet earth, reminding everyone that a new day had arrived with fresh hope. Chickens scratched the ground, goats bleated lazily, and women began sweeping their compounds with short palm brooms. The entire village woke gently, as if guided by the same ancient rhythm that had lived in Izayama long before any of them were born. Even the sun seemed to rise with respect, shining softly on the land that held many stories, some spoken, others buried deep in memory. By mid-morning, the market square came alive like a beating heart. Traders laid out their colorful fabrics, spreading bright blues, fierce reds, and deep golds that danced in the light. Fishmongers shouted their prices with voices that carried across the square. Children chased one another between stalls, their laughter mixing with the calls of hawkers selling roasted plantain and fresh palm oil. A drummer sat near a wooden post, tapping a soft rhythm to draw customers closer. The whole market seemed to breathe as one, noisy, busy, and full of life. Anyone who stepped into it felt the energy of the village flowing through their veins. Not far from the market stood the ancient baobab tree, tall and unmoved by time. Its wide trunk carried scars of weather, war, and whispered secrets. The elders said the baobab saw everything: births, betrayals, victories, and tears, and kept them safe in its wooden heart. Children sat under it on quiet afternoons, listening to the grown-ups tell stories of old kings, trickster spirits, and warriors who carried both strength and sorrow. When the wind blew through its branches, it sounded like the old tree was adding its own voice, reminding everyone that the past never truly sleeps. As evening approached, drums rose from the far end of the village. Their sound rolled through the air like thunder speaking in a familiar tongue. Some drums called people to gather for celebration. Others warned of danger or important news. And some carried messages from the ancestors, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. Villagers paused in their chores to listen, trying to understand what the rhythm meant. In Izayama, words were powerful, but the drums often spoke louder than any mouth could. They tied the living to those who had walked before them. Night fell gently, carrying cool air and the faint glow of moonlight across the village paths. Families gathered around small fires while elders cleared their throats, ready to pass on stories that shaped the hearts of the young. They spoke of spirits who punished greed, of hunters who disrespected the forest, of lovers whose loyalty brought them blessings. Their voices rose and fell like waves, each tale holding a lesson deeper than the story itself. "Remember," an elder would always say, raising a cautious finger, "nothing done in shadow escapes the ancestors." The children shivered, but they listened closely, for these words built the foundation of wisdom in Izayama. Among the children who grew up on such tales was Kwabena, a boy molded by humility and hard work. From a young age, he woke before sunrise to fetch water, weed the family farm, and tend to the goats. No task was too small for him. When the elders spoke, he listened. When his mother called, he came running. People in the village often said, "This boy walks with respect in his bones." Though life was not easy for his family, Kwabena never complained. He moved with the quiet strength of someone who understood duty. Much of his wisdom came from Mame Efua, his grandmother, whose hands were wrinkled but strong. She would sit on a wooden stool in the evenings, calling him to sit near her feet. "My child," she would say, tapping his chest gently, "a man's true wealth sits in here, not in his pockets." She told him stories of ancestors who rose from nothing, and others who fell because they forgot where they came from. "If you lose your roots," she warned, "the wind will carry you like a dry leaf." Her voice planted seeds in Kwabena's heart, seeds that shaped the man he would become. Growing up in hardship gave Kwabena dreams, not of riches or fame, but of lifting his family from struggle. He often watched his mother stretch small portions of food, trying to make them last for everyone. He saw how his grandmother hid her pain when she walked. These moments carved a promise inside him. "One day," he whispered to himself many times, "I will rise, not for pride, but for them." His dreams were clean and honest, like water drawn straight from the well. Before he left Izayama for the city many years later, he stood alone under the ancestral moon. The air was still, and the village slept. He knelt on the bare earth, placing his palm on the ground as Mame Efua had taught him. "Ancestors," he murmured, "guide my steps. I will return to this land as a son who brings blessings, not shame." The moon glowed brighter, as though listening. And in that quiet moment, Kwabena sealed a vow that would shape his destiny. The foreign land was colder than Kwabena had imagined. Snow fell in thin, sharp flakes, and the wind cut through even the thickest coat. Nights were long and quiet, filled only with the hum of distant traffic and the lonely echo of footsteps in empty streets. Kwabena often stared at the small room he rented, the walls bare, the ceiling low. Every day, he remembered the warm earth of Izayama, the smell of wet soil after rain, the laughter of children chasing goats. Here, there was no sun to caress the skin, no familiar voice calling his name. Loneliness pressed on him like a heavy stone, and yet he worked tirelessly, knowing the sacrifices he made now would one day lift his family from struggle. He labored from sunrise to sunset, his hands raw from carrying crates, his back aching from bending for hours, his spirit tested with every exhausting step. The work was menial, yet it kept him focused. "If I falter now, my family suffers," he whispered to himself during breaks, rubbing sore muscles. Each crate stacked, each delivery made, was more than a task, it was a promise fulfilled silently. Other workers complained, their voices full of bitterness, but Kwabena's heart stayed firm. He endured not for himself, but for the small compound back home and the mother and brother he loved. Every pang of exhaustion was a silent prayer for them. Each year, he carefully saved, wrapping the money in letters addressed to his mother. He imagined the envelope traveling across oceans, carried by strangers and machines, yet guided by hope. "This will help buy seeds for the farm, clothes for Kojo, and medicine for Mame Efua," he thought as he dropped the letter into the postbox, trusting the journey. Sending the money gave him purpose. Each envelope carried not just coins, but belief that his home was becoming brighter, that his family's toil would soon be eased. Even far away, the bond of blood and love tied him to Izayama. Late at night, after exhausting days, he would sit by the dim lamp, imagining the faces of those he missed. He pictured his mother's smile, how her eyes crinkled when she laughed, how Kojo bent over books, determined to learn. He thought of the goats and the farm, of the courtyard finally echoing with joy rather than hunger. Quiet pride warmed him more than food ever could. He had left home as a boy, but through his sacrifices, he felt he was becoming a man who could carry his family's burdens with honor. Each letter sent, each coin saved, was a step toward that dream. Then the calls from home began to feel different. His mother's voice, once warm and full of laughter, now sounded hesitant, almost afraid. "Kwabena, how are you?" she asked, her words clipped, as if weighing each syllable before releasing it. Silence stretched between them longer than usual, filled with unspoken worry. "Mama, is everything well at home?" he asked gently. Yes, all is fine," she murmured, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Something was amiss, though she would not say. Kojo's tone, too, had changed. The brother who once laughed with him over childhood games now spoke sharply, his voice distant, as if he had grown into someone Kwabena did not recognize. "I am managing here, Kwabena," Kojo said one day, impatience and strange confidence in his words. "You need not worry about us." It was not disrespectful, yet the coldness made Kwabena's heart tighten. A seed of unease planted itself in his mind. An old family friend, hearing Kwabena's concerns, whispered words that clung to his soul. "Open your eyes, Kwabena," the man warned, lowering his voice to a hush. "Not every smile comes from a clean heart. Watch closely. What is gained too quickly may be paid with another's suffering." The warning haunted him, but he could not yet see the full truth. He clenched his fists and breathed deeply, trying to keep fear from clouding his resolve. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, Kwabena prepared for the journey back. He packed his small bag carefully, every item carrying a memory of home and a promise of return. His thoughts swirled. He would be welcomed as the son who labored in silence for the family, the hero who carried their burdens across seas. Yet beneath that hope, a shadow lingered, whispering that not all was as it seemed. As he boarded the bus that would take him home, Kwabena looked out at the fading skyline of the foreign land, and whispered a prayer to the ancestors, "Guide me safely. Let my eyes see what must be seen, and my heart remain strong." The road to Izayama stretched ahead, carrying him toward love, confrontation, and a truth he was yet unprepared to face. Kwabena's feet sank slightly into the familiar red earth as he walked through the village paths he had known since childhood. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that seemed heavier than he remembered. The air carried a strange stillness, almost as if the land itself hesitated to breathe. Every corner, every curve of the dusty lanes, whispered memories of laughter, mischief, and morning greetings, but now they felt distant, shadowed. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed how the village had changed, not in buildings or roads, but in the weight that pressed down on hearts. Something had shifted in his absence, and he felt it before seeing it. Eyes turned toward him as he passed, yet there was no joy, no warm recognition. Farmers paused mid-sweep, heads tilting, but quickly looked away. Children stopped their games, staring through him, not at him. Some villagers' faces reflected pity, others a quiet fear that made Kwabina's chest tighten. A few older men muttered prayers under their breath. Even the elders, who usually welcomed returning sons with open arms, only nodded without warmth. The young man who had left with hope felt now a strange unease. He had returned to a home where hearts were closed and smiles seemed borrowed. Whispers followed him like shadows. Low murmurs twisted around the corners of alleys and through open windows. "Is it true, Kwabina's money?" one voice began, only to trail into silence. Another said, "No one can know, but things are not as they were." Each whispered sentence pricked at him, like needles made of doubt. The words were careful, cautious, but they carried a sharpness that cut through the quiet. Every smile he saw now seemed fragile, every greeting measured. He sensed secrets folded tightly behind polite expressions, and the old stories of the ancestors' vigilance in uncovering hidden sins stirred in his memory. When he reached his family home, the first sight stole his breath. The house he had left, small and weathered, now stood proudly with polished wooden doors, ornate windows, and a freshly thatched roof that gleamed in the sun. Flowers lined the yard, neatly planted, exotic and unfamiliar. The air smelled of oil and incense, a scent he had never known in this humble compound. How had this wealth come to them? Each detail screamed opulence, far beyond what his careful remittances could have built. His heart twisted, unsure whether to feel pride for his family or alarm at the sudden grandeur. Stepping inside, he saw his mother, trying to force warmth into her smile. Her hands shook slightly as she offered him a seat. "Kwabina, my son, welcome home," she said, though her eyes avoided his. The tenderness he remembered was there, but it was fragile, layered with tension. Kojo stood nearby, taller, confident, yet distant. "It's good to see you, brother," he said, voice flat and polite, but devoid of the playful familiarity they had once shared. Kwabina felt the cold distance immediately, a wall he had never expected to find within his own family. He swallowed hard, forcing a calm smile, but his mind raced, questioning what had happened during his absence. The first shock came in pieces. Whispers from neighbors revealed the extent of change. Kojo had risen suddenly to a position of influence, giving directions to elders and receiving nods of respect that should have belonged only to the village's oldest men. Motorbikes gleamed in the yard, fine clothes replaced simple garments, and doors opened to him in a way they had never opened before. Kwabina's heart sank. How did this happen?" he asked himself, his voice almost a whisper. Inside, Kojo sat among the elders like an equal, leaning casually, while villagers deferred to him. The young man who had once scrambled for scraps of attention now commanded authority naturally, almost frighteningly so. Kwabina watched the proceedings in stunned silence. The respect, the power, the wealth, it all seemed to have appeared without sweat, without story, without explanation. Something dark threaded through the brightness, a sense that the surface glittered with shadows beneath. His mother's demeanor added to his unease. She followed Kojo silently, her steps tentative, her eyes cast downward whenever he spoke. Fear clung to her movements, a trembling obedience that weighed heavily on Kwabina's spirit. He had returned to lift his family, to bring blessings and hope, yet here they all were, living under a quiet terror, and he had no idea how it had begun. He began to hear the rumors, whispered in corners as people passed by. "Your money never touched their hands," an elderly woman murmured. "Ask what Kojo did while you were away." Each word struck his heart like hot iron. Could it be true? Had his sacrifices been taken and twisted into something unrecognizable? The whispers carried warnings too. "Not all good fortune comes from honest hands," said another, leaning on a cane, eyes wary but knowing. Kwabina's mind spun. He wanted to defend his blood, yet the voices of the village, careful and hushed, planted seeds of doubt that would not easily be ignored. He stood in the courtyard, the sun casting shadows across the gleaming house, the wealth, and the uneasy faces within. Torn between loyalty to family and the quiet truths murmured by the villagers, he clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. "I must see for myself," he whispered to the ancestors. "I will uncover the path, no matter how dark it may be." And with that vow, the young man who had once left Izayama with hope now stepped fully into the shadows of a home that had changed while he was away, unaware that the storm awaiting him was far deeper than he imagined. Kwabena moved through the house with the weight of unease pressing down on him. His eyes caught a small, iron-bound box tucked in a corner of the storeroom. It was old, dusty, and locked tight, but what startled him most was its contents. Inside were letters he had sent over the years, envelopes filled with his hard-earned money, untouched, unopened. Every note, every coin, a testament to his sacrifices, now lay abandoned, ignored, as if his trust had been swallowed by shadows. He ran a trembling hand over the edges of the box, the bitter taste of betrayal burning on his tongue. How could this happen?" he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. His mother sat quietly nearby, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment, their eyes met, then hers darted away, refusing to hold his gaze. The guilt she carried seemed to weigh her down like chains. He saw it in the way her shoulders hunched, in the tremor of her fingers, in the tight line of her lips. The warmth he had expected from her welcome was absent, replaced by a silence that spoke volumes. "Mama, why?" he asked softly, but the answer did not come easily. She only shook, a tear slipping down her cheek. Kojo, standing in the doorway, gave a small, controlled smile, his tone calm but carrying an edge that chilled Kwabena. "Brother," he said smoothly, "the village has its new rules now. You must understand. Some things are no longer yours to touch." There was no overt threat, yet the weight behind his words pressed down, unspoken but unmistakable. Kwabena's chest tightened. The brother he had once trusted seemed a stranger, a man whose hands now held power built from deceit. The house felt alien. Every corner, every polished surface, every carefully arranged item seemed to belong to someone else. Kwabena walked through the rooms, memories of his childhood clashing with the opulence that now filled the space. It was no longer a home of laughter and modest pride. It had been transformed into a palace of shadows. He touched the carved chairs, the gleaming floors, even the walls, searching for some sign of familiarity, but found none. Each step made him feel smaller, an intruder in his own life. Then his eyes caught the first signs of the darkness that had crept in unnoticed. Strange carvings lined the walls, ash and small patterns rested in corners, and curious objects, unfamiliar and ominous, seemed placed with intent. These were not the symbols of a protective home. They carried the weight of rituals not meant for the innocent. His heart pounded as he realized the spiritual threads of his family had been tampered with. Whispers of the elders reached him soon after. Hushed conversations, voices bending low around the fires of the village, spoke of a shrine hidden deep within the forest, a place feared even by the bravest men. "Kojo has been there," they said carefully. "Seeking favor the ancestors do not grant lightly." The knowledge cut Kwabena like a spear. He understood that wealth could have a price far heavier than gold. An elderly hunter, revered for his knowledge of the old ways, approached him quietly. "Kwabena," he said, voice deep with the wisdom of generations, "I have seen the signs. The balance has been broken. Your brother walks a path that feeds on another man's spirit. You must act carefully, for the spirits of the forest do not forgive easily." Kwabena nodded slowly, the enormity of the betrayal pressing down on him like the weight of the baobab trees themselves. Finally, Kwabena could no longer hold back. He confronted his mother, his voice shaking with a mix of sorrow and anger. "Mama, tell me the truth. 4 years I sent my sweat, my prayers, my hope, and yet—" His words faltered as he saw the tears glisten in her eyes. She could no longer hide the burden she carried. Her sobs broke the dam of silence. "Kwabena, it is true," she whispered, voice trembling. "Kojo, he took what was not his. He used your blessings, your destiny, to feed his wealth. I did not stop him. I was afraid. I could not speak." The confession hit him like a crashing wave. Every letter, every coin, every ounce of effort he had poured into his family had been drained to empower another. Kwabena sank to the ground, hands gripping the floor as the weight of betrayal crushed him. His heart ached, torn by the love he bore his brother and the fury of the deception. He stole me, he muttered to himself, voice heavy with grief. My own life, my own blessings, taken by my blood. The house, the wealth, even his mother's sorrow, all of it became a mirror of the darkness that had crept silently into his family. In that moment, Kwabena understood the depth of the storm he faced. He had been spiritually drained, his own success twisted into another's shadow. Yet, even in his despair, a spark remained, a quiet resolve, a whisper of ancestral strength that would not be extinguished. He rose slowly, eyes blazing with determination. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but he knew one truth. No betrayal, however deep, could silence the spirit that carried the blessings of generations. Kwabena sank to the earth, the weight of betrayal pressing on him like a mountain. His hands shook, his chest heaved, and the tears fell freely. Kojo, his own brother, had taken what was sacred, his blessings, his labor, and the life he had built with struggle and honor. Every memory of hope he had carried across oceans now felt hollow, as though it had been harvested to feed another's greed. Why would you do this, Kojo? He whispered into the empty house, his voice breaking. We were brothers. How could you steal my destiny? His spirit felt hollow, as though the ancestors themselves had turned away, disappointed by the betrayal within the family. The warmth of protection and guidance he had once felt from Mame Efua's teachings seemed faint, distant, like a flickering candle in the wind. Every step he had taken, every hardship endured abroad, now echoed with emptiness. He could feel his strength draining, his confidence faltering, and the familiar rhythm of life in the village felt foreign. Shadows of doubt circled him, whispering questions he dared not answer. Are you strong enough? Are you worthy? Can you reclaim what was stolen? A low, guttural cry tore from his throat, echoing across the hills and valleys of Izayama. It was a cry that carried grief, fury, and desperation, a sound that reached beyond the world of men, calling to the spirits of the ancestors. The wind seemed to answer, carrying the echo of his anguish through the forest and into the sacred grove. Somewhere, deep in the heart of the ancestral land, the old voices stirred, listening. Remembering the lessons Mame Efua had etched into his heart, Kwabena rose, wiping the tears from his face. She had taught him that a son of the soil must honor the ancestors, respect the balance of the world, and act with courage even when the heart trembles. Guided by her words, he moved toward the grove, the sacred land where the spirits of old still lingered. The air shifted as he entered, heavy with whispers of souls who had walked the village long before him. Every leaf, every shadow, carried a voice, a lesson, a warning, a memory. From the depths of the grove, a priest emerged, cloaked in white and adorned with beads and charms that spoke of generations of wisdom. His eyes were deep, seeing beyond the mortal veil. Kwabena, the priest said, voice steady yet grave, your brother's pact is nearly complete. If you do not act, your life will be the final offering. His wealth, his power, will be sealed at the cost of your spirit. Kwabena's knees trembled, but he held his head high, drawing strength from the memories of home, of his grandmother, of the sacrifices he had endured. You must fight, the priest continued, not with anger alone, but with clarity, courage, and the protection of those who came before you. Your destiny is not gone, it has only been stolen. The spirits will guide you, but the journey will be dangerous. Only the brave can reclaim what has been taken. The priest handed him a small bundle of charms and whispered instructions, each symbol and word infused with ancestral power. Kwabena nodded, feeling the first spark of hope ignite within the darkness of his despair. The path to the forbidden shrine lay before him, shrouded in fog and foreboding shadows. Every step felt heavier, the air thick with the energy of power misused and lives exploited. As he approached, the shrine loomed, twisted with dark symbols and the scent of ash and incense that burned too sharply for a sacred place. At its entrance, Kojo awaited, flanked by a tall, cloaked figure whose eyes gleamed with unnatural light. His brother's smile was cold, confident, unyielding. You've come, Kojo said, voice smooth and dangerous. I expected no less, but the game is already won. Kwabena's heart thundered, yet he did not falter. The illusions rose, shadows of fear and false promises, visions meant to shatter his spirit. He saw himself drowning, failing, broken in every possible way. Each vision struck like a spear, Each whisper tried to turn his resolve to dust. Yet, beneath it all, he felt the voices of the ancestors rise, joining his heartbeat with their own rhythm, chanting old songs of protection, courage, and justice. The balance shifted. The spirits of the forest and his lineage rose, unseen but powerful, countering the dark energy that had corrupted his brother. Kojo's eyes hardened, blinded by greed and jealousy, refusing to bend or listen. "I will not lose what is mine," he shouted, raising his hands, the guardian at his side echoing every threat. But the ground trembled beneath them, the wind carrying voices that were not of this world, and the power he had stolen began to turn against him. Kwabena felt the surge of ancestral strength coursing through him, the whispers, the chants, the courage of generations, and he knew that even the darkest pact could be broken by one who fights with heart, honor, and the spirits at his side. Kojo's chest swelled with pride as he raised his arms to claim the power he had stolen. The shrine, meant to bless and balance, trembled at his touch. The symbols etched into the stone pulsed violently, reacting not to devotion but to greed. The air thickened, incense swirling like restless spirits, and the torches flickered as if shying from the corruption before them. "It is mine. Everything is mine," Kojo roared, his voice slicing through the night. Yet the more he demanded, the more the shrine resisted, turning its own force against him. Shadows twisted unnaturally, walls groaned, and a low, ancestral murmur filled the space. The sacred ground shook beneath their feet. Torches blew out, leaving darkness pregnant with unseen eyes. Whispers and cries of ancestors carried warnings that no man could ignore. The air felt electric, each breath a struggle, as if the world itself judged the impure. Kojo staggered, his confidence cracking. "No, this cannot be," he shouted, trying to assert control, but the spiritual energy he had sought to command now battered him. The shrine rejected his impurity, unmasking the theft of destiny and the treachery he had embraced. A fierce wind swept through the sanctuary, carving the ancestors' judgment into every corner. "No wealth built on stolen destiny can endure," echoed a voice older than the village, sharper than a spear. Kojo's eyes widened in horror as realization struck too late. In his lust for riches, he had bartered love, kinship, and humanity. All that was solid, the family he mocked, the village he manipulated, the blessings he perverted, crumbled before him. He fell to the ground, trembling and defeated, as the shrine's energy drained him, leaving his body bent, his spirit hollow, stripped of pride and protection. The symbols that had once promised power glowed dimly, then faded, withdrawing the favor he had falsely earned. The villagers, peering from behind the trees and walls, gasped as they watched the illusion of wealth dissipate. Motorbikes, fine clothes, and tokens of influence seemed to vanish into the wind, scattering like dust caught in the harmattan. Even his followers, who had bowed before him, melted into silence, leaving him alone with the weight of truth. The elders stepped forward slowly, faces lined with regret. "We should have spoken," one murmured, "but we were afraid." Another nodded, whispering, "Silence can be as deadly as betrayal." The village finally confronted its collective failure, understanding that their inaction had allowed corruption to grow unchecked. Kwabena, standing at the edge of the shrine, felt the ancestral burden lift. The spiritual chains that had sapped his strength for so long loosened, leaving clarity and peace to wash over him like a calming rain. The crops surrounding his homestead, once withering under the shadow of treachery, began to thrive again. His livestock moved with vitality, and the crafts of his hands returned to their former excellence. The villagers, witnessing the restoration, looked to Kwabena with newfound respect. They understood that resilience was measured not by force, but by surviving fire and returning stronger. Yet, even as the blessings flowed, Kwabena's heart carried the scars of betrayal. He touched his chest, feeling the ache that would not vanish overnight. He knew the land could heal faster than the spirit, and that forgiveness, even self-forgiveness, was a path longer than any road he had traveled abroad. Still, the ancestral whispers assured him, the dawn had returned, and with it, hope, honor, and the promise of justice restored. The morning sun poured golden light over Izayama, yet in Mame Efua's house, a heavy shadow lingered. The mother, her hands trembling, sat in silence, replaying every choice she had made. She remembered the warnings whispered by elders, the subtle hints of danger that Kojo carried in his eyes, and her own hesitation. Each moment of silence now felt like a stone added to the fire that consumed her family. "I failed both my sons," she whispered, voice cracking like dry twigs. Her heart ached with shame and sorrow, a mother torn between loyalty, fear, and love. Gathering courage, she walked to Kwabina's compound. Every step carried the weight of years of guilt. Her eyes, downcast and heavy, reflected the journey of a woman who had watched her home fracture in silence. She carried not gold, not gifts, but offerings of humility, kola nuts, a small cloth, and water from a sacred stream. Kneeling before her eldest, she placed them carefully, bowing her head. "Son," she murmured, "I come not to explain, but to ask forgiveness." The gesture, simple yet profound, carried the essence of African tradition, the act of humility as a bridge over broken bloodlines. Kwabina's chest tightened as he looked at her, seeing the cracks in her strength, the honesty in her shame. He placed a hand on hers, steadying her trembling frame. "Mother, you are forgiven," he said softly, eyes glistening. "Strength is not in holding grudges. It is in surviving, in forgiving, and in letting the family rise again." Around them, the village watched, learning that reconciliation is a power deeper than any ancestral curse, a lesson whispered from one generation to the next. Meanwhile, Kojo awoke in a haze of pain and emptiness. His body was alive, but the pride, greed, and vanity that had fueled him were gone. He felt the weight of his choices pressing down, a mark that would never fade. When he returned to the village, he found no fanfare, no envy-driven glances, only quiet faces, carrying memories of the man who had sought to steal the blessings of another. He accepted humble work from a farmer, hands blistered but honest. With each day of labor, he learned what dignity meant, sweat earned in truth, not shortcuts taken in shadows. Parents whispered his story to their children, warning them that greed twists a man until even his own shadow fears him. The youth would remember Kojo not as a man of wealth, but as a cautionary tale, a shadow of what happens when one trades blood for gold. And so, the story of Kwabina and Kojo concluded, yet the lessons lingered in the wind, in the market, in the rhythms of the village drum. Quick wealth blinds the heart, but truth always uncovers the rot beneath. Those who betray blood walk a road paved with their own tears, yet destiny bends but never breaks. Even when stolen or delayed, it returns to the rightful soul, guided by the unseen hands of the ancestors, who watch, whisper, and protect.